2 Sundays ago, I preached for 65 minutes. Last Sunday, Daniel preached for 31 minutes. When he finished, he could have started over and preached the entire sermon again, and it still would not have been as long as my sermon. I intend to shorten the length of my sermon today. I'm going to get it down to at least 64 minutes. Baby steps. Church, I bring you from Matthew 2:13 through 23. Israel's most wanted. Israel's most wanted. We've got a rich narrative before us. It will pull us in and provide for us wonderful glimpses of Christ and practical applications for Christians. This is also a very pointed narrative that leads us to blunt implications. It will challenge you Christians to better understand prophecy. It will challenge you non-Christians to better understand the trustworthiness of Scripture. I just want to prepare you. It will make some of you non-Christians uncomfortable. And you Christians, it will bring you comfort. There are 3 movements in the narrative. An escape to Egypt, verses 13, 14, and 15. A bloodbath at Bethlehem, verses 16 through 18. A home in Hicksville, verses 19 through 23. An escape to Egypt, a bloodbath at Bethlehem, a home in Hicksville. Each movement comes with a prophecy. And you will need to pray that the Lord will give you understanding, because those prophecies can be challenging. Let's begin with an escape to Egypt, verse 13. Now when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, "Rise, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him." One of the most difficult things for a Bible teacher to master is the flashback. You see, they are always teaching an ongoing story. So how do you recap without retelling the whole story? You spent an hour on that scene last week. How do you shrink wrap it into a 2-minute flashback? Friends, I'm never just teaching the Bible. I'm always teaching teachers how to teach the Bible. A skill that teachers must develop is the flashback. Concise summaries of things that have already happened. What's led up to this point in the story? Here's my flashback for the text. Matthew lets you peer into a cradle that rocked the world. The long-awaited Messiah came in infancy. Wise men from the east see the Messiah star, and they begin their trek across the desert. They arrive in Jerusalem looking for the newborn king. Instead, they meet the old man king, Herod. After some Bible study, they discover the Messiah was not born in Jerusalem, but 6 miles south in Bethlehem. Herod sends the wise men to find the child and then come back to him and tell him so he can worship the newborn king too. By the time the wise men arrive, Joseph and Mary are no longer in a stable, but in a house in Bethlehem. And Jesus is no longer in a crib, but in his own bed. He's not cooing. He's making complete sentences. He's a toddler who will triumph over the nations. Most toddlers think they are kings. This one actually is. The wise men are warned not to return the same way they came. Herod has evil intentions for the young child. Now, our text. The wise men are gone. The house is full of presents. They left their mark on this little townhouse. Joseph and Mary put Jesus down to sleep. They lay in bed for an hour, I'm sure, just talking about the events that just unfolded. Eventually, they doze off to sleep. As they enter deep sleep, REM sleep, suddenly Joseph receives a dream. God sent an angel to startle him, to warn him. Joseph, take Mary and Jesus and run for your lives. The toddler has just become Israel's most wanted. Herod wants to kill your little boy. He desires to destroy the Messiah. Jesus is in danger. Joseph well knew, as did everyone in Israel, the long history of Herod murdering anyone who he suspected as a rival to his throne. You must escape the murderous intent of Herod. He will soon be on a search and destroy mission, and you are easily within reach of the madman. The instruction is explicit. Rise, flee, remain. A lot of imperatives in the verse. Commands. Rise, flee, remain. Rise. Wake from sleep. Get up before your alarm. Rise. Flee. The Greek word fugo is where we get our English word fugitive. Become a fugitive family. Seek safety in flight. Run, flee. Remain. Stay in Egypt until further notice. Herod is on the hunt for the child king. And notice, Bible student, that the child is mentioned before the mother to show that he's the central figure of this story. The narrative centers on Jesus, not the parents. Verse 14. And he rose and took the child and his mother by night and departed to Egypt. Joseph sensed the urgency. He obeys precisely and immediately. He wakes Mary in the middle of the night. Get up, honey. Mary, wake up. She's dog tired or toddler mom tired. I'm sure he had to shake her a couple of times before she got up. Of course, she's shocked, startled. She jumps, heart racing 100 miles an hour. What is it, Joseph? Start packing, Mary. We've got to leave. Leave? What is happening? What is going on? Will you stop long enough to explain what is taking place? He unpacks the dream, and she starts packing the bags. She doesn't have time to make a packing list. You just start throwing clothes in a suitcase in a situation like this. Joseph, do I bring the dishes? We don't have time to pack dishes. Do I bring the furniture? We don't have room for the furniture. But you crafted all that furniture, Joseph. Leave it. They leave during the night under the cover of darkness. From Bethlehem to the border of Egypt was 75 miles. Joseph, I left my quilt. My grandmother gave me that quilt. It's okay, Mary. It's okay. We didn't have a choice. We've got to make a new life now. Make new friends, form new rhythms. How long will we be away, Joseph? God didn't say. He gave us this much light, and we must obey that light. We will hide out until he says it's time to return. We will hide out as long as Jesus is on the most wanted poster. After going 75 miles and reaching the border, perhaps they went another 100 miles to get to where they were going in Egypt. They most certainly passed the Egyptian pyramids along the Nile that were built 2,500 years previous. I'm sure that caught the gaze of the toddler as they passed. It was a long, tiresome, emotionally draining, expensive journey to another country. Most scholars contest the treasures received from the wise men bankrolled this journey. It provided enough for travel and new lodging in Egypt. Treasures given to Jesus were used on very practical human expenses. The gifts financed the flight. Or, before God sent them on the journey, He supplied them with all that was necessary for the journey. The whole family now is running for their lives. On the world map, they had two options. They could flee to Syria in the north or Egypt in the south. Egypt was the better option because it had a thriving Jewish community. No wonder God sent them in this direction. Ancient historians tell us there were about 1 million Jews living in Egypt at the time. It was a great place to get lost. Egypt was a natural asylum for the young Jewish family. Alexander the Great, when he laid out the city of Alexandria, he designed a place for Jews. 2 of the 5 districts were filled with Jews. If the family went to Alexandria, they traveled 312 miles. But a sizable Jewish community existed everywhere in Egypt. In every city, there was a colony of Jews. It was a natural haven for first century Israelites. It was certainly not unheard of for Jewish people to find refuge in Egypt. God was moving the nations and their reception of other world religions to accomplish His plan. When Joseph and Mary took Jesus to Egypt, they were not surrounded by aliens. They were surrounded by their own people. They didn't have to learn a new language. They lived among people with their same customs. They didn't have to walk like an Egyptian. They walked like Jews. Verse 15, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet. Listen to this. Out of Egypt I called my son. Plot thwarted, family saved. Now, brothers and sisters, I want us to pause here and think deeply about what Matthew does with this story, what pagans do with this story, and what the church should do with this story. First, out of Egypt, what Matthew does with this story. Matthew quotes Hosea 11:1. How does Jesus fulfill this prophecy? It's an odd quotation. It's talking about Israel leaving Egypt during the Exodus. At first glance, it looks like Matthew is connecting the dots by the slimmest of ties, just by the word Egypt. Plus, in Hosea, Egypt was the bad guy. In Matthew, Egypt is the good guy. In Hosea, Egypt enslaved God's people. In Matthew, they are a refuge for God's people. Is Matthew randomly taking Old Testament scriptures and trying to squeeze them into the life of Christ? Is this a big swing and miss for Matthew? I don't think so. Let me show you what is happening. Israel is called God's child, His son, in Hosea 11:1. Jesus is called God's child, His son, here in Matthew. This is the history of Israel recapitulated in the life of Jesus. The whole nation was called the Son of God. Now the title Son of God is reduced to one person. God called both Israel and Jesus his son. God's first son was in Egypt. Now God's final son is in Egypt. God's son Israel failed. God's son Jesus will not fail. Jesus is the new Israel. Matthew is purposefully introducing Jesus as God's new son. He's not like the old son, Israel, who sinned. When they left Egypt, they practiced idolatry and adultery. The rest of Matthew will show that when Jesus left Egypt, he remained sinless. Matthew is retelling Israel's well-known story, but he's putting Jesus right in the middle as the main character in the story. Jesus is the new Israel. Matthew is remembering when Israel was just a toddler of a nation in Egypt. Now Jesus is a toddler in Egypt. Matthew clearly wants to portray Jesus as fulfilling Israel's history and bringing it to a climax. Matthew didn't think Hosea 11:1 was a direct prophecy about Jesus and his family going to Egypt. And Hosea certainly didn't mean it as such. One scholar pointed out, I don't think Matthew was using Hosea 11:1 saying it predicts Jesus' time in Egypt. I do believe that Matthew thought Jesus' flight to and return from Egypt was key, filling up Hosea's prophecy. End quote. Jesus gives new meaning to that old prophecy. Jesus is the embodiment of Israel. The first faithless son, Israel, now the full and final faithful son, Jesus. Matthew consistently sees Israel as fulfilled in Jesus. Israel's climax is Jesus. The Old Testament ends in Jesus. He's the point. Matthew can look at something that happened in Israel and say, that ultimately refers to Christ. First Exodus out of Egypt, God's son, lowercase s, sinned. Second Exodus out of Egypt, God's son, capital S, will not sin. Jesus is more than a better Moses. He's the embodiment of Israel, a new and better son. Will you look at me? Jesus replicates the nation's experience without the nation's failure. Jesus replicates the nation's experience without the nation's failure. His personal history repeats certain aspects of their national history. We will see more of that as we walk through Matthew. Jesus, true Israel, retracing the steps of ethnic Israel. As an aside, saints, I'd like for you to notice the reversal, the twist of roles. In Hosea, Egypt will slay and Israel will protect. In Matthew, Israel will slay and Egypt will protect. Israel, God's son, escapes Egypt. Now Jesus, God's son, escapes Israel into Egypt. In Hosea, God's son, lowercase s, Israel. In Hosea, God's son was on Egypt's most wanted list. Kill all the Jews. In Matthew, God's son, capital S, is on Israel's most wanted list. Kill Jesus. Out of Egypt, what pagans do with this story. Matthew uses out of Egypt to depict Jesus as new Israel. Pagans use out of Egypt to discredit Jesus as a new sorcerer. That's what the pagans charged Jesus with. They viewed his whole time in Egypt as a negative. They say he learned the occult while in Egypt. Celsus, a 2nd century philosopher who attacked Christianity, his literary attacks are still in circulation today. Celsus said that Jesus lived in Egypt and learned the sorcery and magic of the Egyptians. He discovered miraculous powers in Egypt and returned home to substantiate his claim to deity. What Celsus misses is that Jesus didn't go to Egypt as an adult, he went as a toddler. Christian, what God designed for you to see beauty in, Satan comes along and seeks for you to see hideousness in it. Out of Egypt, see the beauty. What Matthew does with this story, what pagans do with this story, now what the church should do with this story. You say, Kyle, what should we do with this story? Well, you should first peek at God's sovereignty, then peer into your difficulties. First, peek at God's sovereignty, then peer into your difficulties. First, peek behind the curtain at the sovereign control of God. Man's plot can never frustrate God's plan. People plot against God's agenda, God's church, God's people. Brothers and sisters, God's sovereignty doesn't sweat Satan's pawns. Sure, they scheme, they plan, they strategize, but God is sovereign over all those attacks. Don't get bent out of shape when someone lies about you, or attacks you, or gossips about you. Let them whisper. Let them plan. God is sovereign. Sometimes the attacks, like in our text, come from within Israel. Expect that. God has always comforted his people with his sovereignty. That's the medicine they need to take. So all throughout the Bible, he shows you stories where he is sovereign and in control. It looks like things are out of control. Clothes flying everywhere in a rush to pack the bags, running to escape, tears. But behind it all is his control. These stories allow you to pull the curtain back and see the sovereign. Take your medicine, beloved. Swallow it all. You must come away with God's control. This is merely the latest installment of an ongoing battle. The history of this conflict began in Genesis 3:15. Satan has been trying since the beginning to stomp out the seed of the woman. Anything to kill the line of the Messiah, to exterminate the Jewish people so the Messiah can't come from them. All those attacks were satanically inspired. The line of David came down to one man at points, a single person to further the line. Throughout history, Satan has led a relentless assault on the seed. The first attack, kill the line that produces the seed. The second attack, kill the seed once he is born. Our text. The third attack, keep the seed from going to the cross. It's always the role of the serpent. The serpent takes many forms. In Esther, it was Haman exterminating the Jews. In Matthew, it was Herod exterminating the seed. Many men and women have taken on that role throughout history. They are anti-seed, anti-Christ. God laughs at their plans. He looks down at those puny little humans and he chuckles. This is the latest in a long sequence of Satan's attempts to wipe out the Messiah. The dragon knew who the Messiah child was, and he unleashes an all-out assault to destroy him. It was the old red dragon that put Jesus on Israel's most wanted list. Saints, the object of the hate is still the seed today. The church of Jesus Christ. Satan schemes through persecution and temptation and discouragement. What should we do with this story? Well, you should first peek at God's sovereignty, then peer into your difficulties. May God help this to land on you. The Father willed difficulties in the life of his precious Son. Expect him to will difficulties in your life as well. The journey to Egypt wasn't easy. The medieval church couldn't imagine this being the will of God for this new family who did nothing other than be faithful to God. Later tradition added all types of colorful imagery to the story. The story of Joseph, Mary, and Jesus on the run for their lives. There were many legends and myths created to make it seem like the time traveling to Egypt and in Egypt was a vacation. Some of these apocryphal writings recorded the craziest events. One legend indicated that when Joseph and Mary and Jesus needed a place to sleep one night on the way to Egypt, they sought refuge in a cave. It was so cold that the ground was covered with frost. A little spider recognized Jesus and wished so much that he could do something to keep him warm that he spun his web across the entrance of the cave so thick that it hung like a curtain and the cave became warm and cozy. And in addition, wherever they traveled, animals would bow and pay homage to them, and idols would crumble to dust whenever they passed them. Saints, the pyramids didn't crumble as toddler Jesus walked by. The camels didn't bow. This was not a walk in the park. This was an escape for their lives. It wasn't fun. It wasn't safe. This was not a vacation. They were fugitives on the run. It was not easy. God willed difficulties in their life. God didn't protect Jesus from trials. Do you think he will protect you from them? Hey, exiles far from home, spiders don't weave webs to make you warm. They bite to make you sick. Spiders aren't tucking you in and turning on the space heater. This is a fallen world, and they are fallen spiders. Expect infections and sickness and hardships and problems and dilemmas. Imagine the trauma experienced by all of them having to flee in the night. They had to live in neighborhoods they didn't want to live. They had to scrape to make ends meet. There were times they felt threatened and unsafe. Their future turned on its head. Life is not turning out how they imagined. Friends, hear me. Their love for God did not circumvent the challenges of life. Mary and Joseph had two options. They could trust God or live in fear and worry. You have those same two options. You can trust God or you can live in fear and worry. Peek at God's sovereignty, peer into your difficulties. An escape to Egypt, now a bloodbath at Bethlehem, verse 16. Then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious. And he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and in all that region who were 2 years old and under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. Listen, once Herod realized the wise men had tricked him and traveled back home on some other interstate, he flipped his lid. He flew into a rage. He was exceedingly angry, intensely furious. Herod would have waited a couple of days, then sent the messengers to inquire of the wise men. What is taking you so long to return? Herod hears, they are gone, sir. No trace of them. They are in the wind, king. Herod feels tricked. His feelings were not reality, but he felt tricked. He felt deceived. Matthew is picking up Herod's perspective. He feels mocked. He imagines the wise men walking away laughing at him. The trickster felt tricked. In fact, his trick boomeranged and hit him in the forehead. He feels like a fool. A better translation of tricked could be outwitted. When he saw that he had been outwitted by the wise men. Herod did not like to be outsmarted. He's livid with rage. That child must die. This is no mild displeasure. This is veins popping out of his forehead. This is very much exceedingly angry. He's thirsty for blood. He's the vampire king. Herod's latter years were hardly that of a rational thinker. He was an egotistical maniac. We know from history that he was ordering killings from his deathbed. In fact, he knew the Jews would celebrate his death, so he locked up many of them, nobles, and ordered that they be executed the moment he died. He wanted there to be widespread mourning at the time of his death, so he will force the Jews to weep for him. He wants to make sure the voice of lamentation will be heard when he dies. This is a sick man. He's maniacal. He was marked by extreme behavior, violent frenzy, irrationality, crazed obsession. The child king must die. So Herod puts out a hit on Jesus. Herod looks to eliminate the potential rival, the toddler throne pretender. When Herod realizes the wise men were wiser than he opts for indiscriminate killing, a brutal massacre of all male infants. Herod was a master assassin. In keeping with his murderous and paranoid personality, Herod commences the child killing. He orders all boys under 3 years of age in Bethlehem to be killed. All 2-year-olds, all 1-year-olds, all the infants. He has no idea Joseph and Mary took the child to Egypt. He's clueless to that. He's convinced they are still in Bethlehem. His cruel order is signed. His ruthless directive is put into law. His oppressive mandate, his sadistic instruction will be executed that very evening. Math was never Herod's strong suit, and he didn't want the baby king to escape on account of miscalculation. To be safe, kill all the children aged 2 and under. It's a classic example of overkill. The henchman would have used a sword to decapitate the babies, not a needle to slowly kill them. It was a bloodbath in Bethlehem, a horrendous crime of murder. Monsters going door to door, killing children. Butchery, ripping them from their mother's arms and disposing of their fathers if they tried to stop it. It shook the entire town to the core. Horrifying, such blind cruelty, ferocious killings of Bethlehem's children. About 20 children would have been executed. Historians say it could have been as few as 12 boys and as many as 50 if you include the surrounding towns. This is calculated with Bethlehem being a town of 1,000 people and the high infant mortality rate that existed in those days. Imagine the anguish of that little town. The massacre in Bethlehem. This is a small town. Like the little town some of you grew up in. It was localized, but still a horrific atrocity. The entire daycare killed. Everyone in that town was related to someone who was just murdered. Bethlehem is death town. Blood everywhere. Mourning everywhere. Grief everywhere. A scene of unimaginable horror. You've heard the Christmas song, "Let Earth Receive Her King." That line got a lot of babies killed. Verse 17. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and loud lamentation. Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be comforted because they are no more. The least of Herod's intent was to fulfill prophecy with these killings. But that's exactly what he did. We arrive now at our second Old Testament quotation. Matthew quotes the old book twice. This one is another puzzling quotation. What we are left asking, is Matthew using his apostolic authority to pull a white rabbit out of his hat? You say, Kyle, help me understand what Matthew is doing with the Old Testament. Well, he's quoting Jeremiah 31:15. Jeremiah was describing an event that happened 580 years before our text. The Jewish deportation into Babylonian exile. Babylon bull rushed Jerusalem and destroyed the entire city, setting homes on fire, pillaging, raping, and marching the Jewish boys off in chains to be slaves. Jeremiah depicted mothers watching their sons march off in chains to captivity. They bewail the capture of their sons. Screams are heard citywide. Ramah is mentioned because that is 5 miles north of Jerusalem. That was the staging area for the captives, the transport center. The first city the boys would have marched through on their way to slavery. The picture is painted of mothers on the side of the streets falling to pieces, watching their boys march away. They refuse all solace. Their boys were ripped from their arms, as it were. Lamentation, weeping, wailing fill the air in Ramah. But then it says, Rachel is crying in Ramah. Rachel wasn't in Ramah. It seems Matthew has his chronology a bit out of order. Rachel lived over 1,000 years before the Babylonian exile. She wasn't anywhere near there. She was long dead. And so we say to Matthew, okay, let me see the white bunny. What are you doing here? Church, you may remember that Rachel was Jacob's wife. Their 12 children made up the 12 tribes of Israel. Rachel, in our prophecy, represents the mother of a nation. She is weeping for her young boys who were taken into captivity. The mother of the nation of Israel weeps in the city where her sons are assembled for deportation. Now her children are the immeasurably multiplied descendants. Rachel's tears are the tears of a mother. Israel's sons are captured. Ramah was 5 miles north of Jerusalem and 11 miles north of Bethlehem. 11 miles away from the original place of tears is another place of tears. Israel's sons are again the target. Again, mothers are weeping at the capture of their sons. Now, I want you to see Christ. God's son Israel is captured, but God's son Christ would not be captured. Nothing was going to kill Jesus. He was going to make it to the cross. Nobody was going to take his life. He would choose when to die. God would not allow Jesus to be killed in Bethlehem because he wanted to save you. Church, let's take a little sidebar here. I want to give you a skeptic's view of the bloodbath at Bethlehem and a Christian's view of the bloodbath at Bethlehem. First, a skeptic's view of the bloodbath at Bethlehem. And this is it. It didn't happen. It didn't happen. If you've been in a religion class at a secular university, you've probably heard that the entire Bethlehem event didn't happen. They say if it did happen, it would have been recorded in other places besides the Bible. There is no other historical document notating this event. No other ancient history records it. So that absence proves it was invented. This event is often rejected as legendary because of a lack of independent evidence. They say it is folklore. And it is true that we have a lot of writings about Herod's life, and particularly some of his cruelties. However, this event of killing 12 to 15 boys would hardly warrant a mention against the broader escapades of Herod in secular history. It would not have even registered among Herod's other horrific deeds. This was a minor offense in the life of endless atrocities. Given how small Bethlehem was and the rural nature of the surroundings, it is not at all surprising that it's not found in secular history. As few as 12 children involved, this was a relatively minor incident in Herod's bloodthirsty career. A skeptic's view of the bloodbath at Bethlehem, it didn't happen. A Christian's view of the bloodbath at Bethlehem, it's still happening. It's still happening. In Bethlehem, so many harmless lives sacrificed to ambition. In America, so many harmless lives sacrificed to ambition. Well, if I'm going to have a career, if I'm going to live my life, I can't be tied down by a... Satan hates children. He will try to kill children or lead people to abuse children or tell children to mutilate themselves or try to pervert children. Herod massacring children, Pharaoh massacring children. Israel has become Egypt. R.C. Sproul spoke on this text and titled it, "The Slaughter of the Innocent." Satan has often used false religion to kill children, requiring worshipers to sacrifice children in a fire. Sometimes it is governing authorities that attack, like in our text. Sometimes governing authorities work against the law, sometimes with the law, to murder God's little ones. It's just policy, Kyle. It's just policy. It's just policy. It was just policy in our text. He put it into law. Shame on Christians who were silent when the Holocaust was happening. Shame on Christians who were silent when the slave trade was happening. Shame on Christians who were silent when the bloodbath at Bethlehem is legalized in our country. It came from Herod. but it also came from beyond him. It was satanic. And I'm sure people said, look at Herod's great welfare programs. And I've studied it. Dude had some killer welfare programs while he instituted killing the innocent. Very few people think of Bethlehem as a burial place now. They think of it as a birthplace. But there were a lot of burials that took place, listen to me, because of ambition. An escape to Egypt, a bloodbath at Bethlehem, a home in Hicksville, verse 19. But when Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt. All right, let's stop here. The killer died. The killer always dies. He always faces God's judgment. Herod died in the 34th year of his reign at age 70. His wish to execute all those imprisoned Jewish nobles at the moment of his death was never carried out. Josephus, the Jewish historian, paints a picture of Herod at his death. It's really more than you want to know, but I'm going to tell you anyway. It's pretty grotesque. He said Herod had ulcerated entrails, a putrefied and maggoty scrotum, foul breath, constant convulsions that neither physicians nor warm baths could soothe. A 70-year-old diseased man infected with untreatable venereal diseases so that his intestines are literally rotting. He tried to kill the son, then met the son's father in judgment. You are not immortal. You will not live forever. You will meet your Creator. Scorn him now. Be scathed by him later. The athlete who mocks Christ, the actor who laughs at God, the rich and powerful who never give an account on earth. You will meet God and face his wrath. Herod had a gorgeous funeral. His corpse wrapped in purple, upon his head a gold crown, in his hand a scepter. 500 slaves surround his body with perfume, so no hint of decay is indicated by the crowds. But all the pomp and perfume could not remove the stench of his sin. A little chronology note for you historians. Herod died in 4 BC. So Jesus wasn't born right in the middle of BC AD. The guy who wrote the calendar was mostly right, but a little off. Jesus was born in about 6 BC, and Herod died in 4 BC. Verse 19. But when Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, Rise, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead. As long as the tyrant lived, there was danger. But the tyrant is now dead. His murderous jealousy initially caused the family's exile, but now he is gone. His campaign of terror ended. Joseph and Mary probably lived in Egypt for less than 18 months. And does this situation sound familiar? In the middle of the night, Joseph, get up! And he's like, oh, here we go again. Mary, let's pack the bags. We're headed back. There's no sense of urgency this time, though. They can take it slow, packing their little rented apartment. So here's Joseph thinking they are in the clear. Their weeks and months of hiding in Egypt are over. There's no barrier for them to go back to Israel. There's nothing to fear. This is nearly verbatim Exodus 4:19. God told Moses, you can go back to Egypt. Those who seek your life are now dead. Verse 21. And he rose and took the child and his mother and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And being warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee. Now, do you see it? Something seems off. Why tell them to go back to Bethlehem, then tell them while they are on the way that it's too dangerous for them to go back there? Well, that seems off because that's not what happened. They were told to go back to Israel, not necessarily Bethlehem. It seems they were headed back to Bethlehem. As they made it to Israel's border, they were told with another dream where in Israel to stay. Historians tell us just before Herod's death, in the last moments, he changed his last will and testament for like the 6th time. He divided his kingdom into 3 parts, 1 part for each of his 3 sons. He gave the biggest part, that included Jerusalem and Bethlehem, to his son Archelaus. He gave the smallest portion up in the north to his son Philip. Then he gave all the Galilee region, which included Nazareth, to his son Herod Antipas. Originally, Joseph and Mary wanted to return to Bethlehem, but there was a problem. The psycho son ruled that portion, the one who was a brutal tyrant. He's noted for his cruelty in an age when cruel men were not scarce. To inaugurate his reign, he killed 3,000 Jews in the temple during Passover. They all came for a religious festival, and he just slaughtered them. It was an overreaction to an uprising when a few men tore down the offensive Roman eagle erected over the temple gate. Archelaus proved both incompetent and vicious. He had a heavy hand and an empty head. He did not possess the ability to govern that his father did. Roman occupiers appointed and upheld all lesser rulers. So these 3 sons sat on the throne, but only by permission. This son's reign was so bad that Augustus, the Roman emperor, no saint himself, finally banished Archelaus after 9 years of atrocities. Jesus would have been maybe 11 at that time. Archelaus was rebuked repeatedly by the Roman government for his shocking barbarity. Finally, after the Jews sent a delegation to Rome, they made the decision to remove him. So he's eventually removed by Rome, but that's not happened yet. So Joseph rightly sees this as another potential threat on the horizon. Archelaus makes it unsafe to return to Bethlehem. The angel tells Joseph to park in Nazareth. This stay will be much longer than the Egypt stay. In fact, they will permanently settle here. They will raise Jesus here. The king ruling over Nazareth and the rest of Galilee is Herod Antipas. Herod Antipas reigned with more tolerance and peace. Verse 23. And he went and lived in a city called Nazareth, so that what was spoken by the prophets might be fulfilled, that he would be called a Nazarene. Nazareth was less than a blue-collar town. It was known for being rough and uneducated. They were hicks from the sticks, country bumpkins. They were looked down upon. The most backwoods, the most backwater, nowhereville is where Jesus will grow up. It was a tiny agricultural village like many Galilean towns, a pretty uneventful place. Joseph and Mary made their home in this northern backwater of Nazareth, well away from the gaze of authorities. One scholar, John Hanna, said there is less than 480 people in this village. Jesus did not grow up in Washington, D.C. He grew up in Elkton, Kentucky. not a royal city, but a country town. It was rough and rustic, a small village of 70 to 80 acres. Josephus mentions 45 towns in Galilee, but does not once mention Nazareth. It was not prominent. An escape to Egypt, that prophecy was in Hosea 11:1. A bloodbath at Bethlehem, that prophecy was in Jeremiah 31:15. A home in Hicksville, this is our third Old Testament prophecy. If you had trouble tracking down the Old Testament reference, it is because there isn't one. The Old Testament never says Jesus would be called a Nazarene. In fact, Nazareth isn't even mentioned in the Old Testament. Egypt? Yep. Bethlehem? Yep. Nazareth? Nope. Nazareth not being mentioned is not too surprising because the Old Testament rarely extends to any part of Galilee. Most of the Old Testament happened south of this area. We don't know what or where Matthew is quoting. It seems like he is going rogue again, even more rogue than before. This is a problem for us. We have no specific prophecy saying Jesus will grow up in Nazareth, but Matthew is quoting a prophecy. Is it a prophecy we don't have access to? Various theories have been suggested. It could be a pun or a put down. If it was a pun, then it married phonetics with prophecy. The root word for Nazareth and branch sound alike. Branch is prophesied many places in the Old Testament. It's like a big stump with something growing out of it. A shoot, a branch will appear. Those are found all in Isaiah and Jeremiah. It would be like a word play. The town sign entering the village would say, Nazareth, welcome to the city of the branch. Out of the dead stump, here he comes. He's the branch man from Branchtown, Jesus. So there's this etymology possibility. Nazareth is derived from the messianic title branch. The other option is the several passages possibility. Not the pun option, but the put down option. In the two previous cases, there's references to a particular prophet and then a quotation that is pretty unambiguous. Here, there's a general reference to the prophets, plural. He is speaking of the prophets as a whole, not an individual prophet in particular. This is the only time Matthew uses the plural, and he also omits one word he usually supplies when it is a direct quotation. Now, I'm only surmising. I won't nail this down. Nothing deep hangs on it. But I'm convinced this is prophetic scripture summarized. This is an amalgamation, a blending together of the prophetic message in general. Gathered from all the prophets, Matthew concludes Jesus will be despised. It seems Matthew is using Nazarene as a derogatory slang term, not quoting one specific text, but summarizing a broader theme. It has overtones of contempt. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? A Messiah coming from Nazareth seems inconceivable and even foolish. They are the bottom of the socioeconomic scale, not very respected. A kind of village you might refer to as podunk. Any Jew who heard this would be like, Jesus grew up in Oak Grove? Yes, Oak Grove. One concluding application. When you follow the despised one, don't be surprised when you are despised. When you follow the despised one, don't be surprised when you are despised. They called Jesus a hick from Hicksville. And the people who follow him are viewed the same way. Will you hear me? You can't be looked at as brilliant and follow Christ. The world will not stand for it. Scripture prophesied Jesus would be despised, and those who follow him would face the same venom. Will you bear the reproach? Will you identify with the Christ your culture despises? My greatest joy every week is gathering with my fellow Hicks from Hicksville, and we worship together our despised Savior.